They said she died in that crash. The board made sure of it, cleaned up the scene, paid off the witnesses, even held a memorial service. But Ava Sinclair wasn't dead. She was bleeding out in a forgotten stretch of Oregon woods, and the only man who could hear her dying breath was a broke single father who hadn't trusted the world in years. This is their story, a tale of survival, betrayal, and the kind of second chances that cost everything. Stay until the end and comment what city you're watching from so I can see how far this story travels. The rain came down in sheets that night, turning the dirt road into a river of mud and the forest into something ancient and unforgiving. Luke Bennett stood on the sagging porch of his cabin, watching the storm roll in from the west, dark clouds swallowing what little moonlight had managed to break through the pines. He held a cup of cold coffee in one hand, the other shoved deep into the pocket of his worn Carhartt jacket. The wind howled through the valley, carrying with it the smell of wet earth and rotting leaves. Inside, his son Eli was asleep, curled up on the couch under a patchwork quilt that had belonged to Luke's mother. The boy was 8 years old, small for his age, with a mop of brown hair that never seemed to lay flat no matter how much Luke tried to comb it down. They'd been living in this cabin for 2 years now, ever since the divorce, ever since Luke had lost his job at the mill, ever since the world had decided that men like him, men who worked with their hands and kept their heads down, weren't worth much anymore. Luke drained the last of his coffee and turned to go inside when he heard it, a sound that didn't belong. He froze, one hand on the screen door, listening. The rain hammered against the tin roof, steady and loud, but beneath it, barely audible, was something else. A cry. Faint. Human. It came from somewhere beyond the tree line, down near the creek where the ground turned soft and dangerous. Luke's first instinct was to ignore it. He'd learned the hard way that getting involved in other people's problems usually meant inheriting their pain. But the sound came again, weaker this time, and something in his chest tightened. He thought of Eli, asleep and safe inside, and wondered what kind of man he'd be teaching his son to become if he just walked away. "Damn it," he muttered, grabbing his flashlight from the hook by the door. He pulled on his boots, laced them tight, and stepped out into the storm. The rain hit him like a cold slap, soaking through his jacket within seconds. He flicked on the flashlight, the beam cutting through the darkness, and started toward the sound. The woods at night were a different place entirely. The trees loomed overhead, their branches clawing at the sky, and the underbrush was thick with brambles and fallen logs. Luke had walked these trails 1,000 times, knew every dip and turn, but the rain made everything unfamiliar, treacherous. His boots slipped in the mud, and twice he had to catch himself on a tree trunk to keep from falling. The cry came again, closer now, and Luke quickened his pace. His heart pounded in his chest, not from exertion, but from something deeper, a primal understanding that whatever he was about to find, it wouldn't be good. He pushed through a thicket of ferns, branches scraping against his face, and the flashlight beam swept across the creek bed. At first he saw nothing but water and rocks, the creek swollen from the rain, rushing fast and angry. Then the light caught something pale, something that didn't belong, collapsed against a fallen log near the water's edge. A woman. Luke's breath caught in his throat. He stumbled forward, nearly dropping the flashlight, and fell to his knees beside her. She was lying on her side, one arm stretched out toward the water as if she'd been trying to reach it. Her clothes were torn and soaked through, a designer coat that looked expensive even in its ruined state, and her dark hair was plastered to her face. Blood stained the side of her head, trickling down her temple, and her breathing was shallow, barely there. "Jesus," Luke whispered, reaching out with shaking hands to check for a pulse. It was there, faint and fluttering beneath his fingertips. But it was there. "Ma'am, can you hear me?" She didn't respond. Her eyes were closed, her face pale as death, and when Luke gently turned her onto her back, he saw more blood, a deep gash along her ribs, the fabric of her shirt dark and wet. She'd been hurt badly, and from the looks of it, she'd been out here for hours. "Hang on," Luke said, his voice rough with urgency. "I got you. Just hang on." He slipped one arm beneath her shoulders, the other under her knees, and lifted her as carefully as he could. She was lighter than he expected, almost fragile, and her head lolled against his chest as he carried her back through the woods. The rain continued to pound down, turning the ground into a slick nightmare, and more than once Luke nearly lost his footing. But he didn't stop. He couldn't stop. Something about the way she'd looked, so alone, so close to death, had awakened something in him that he thought he'd buried years ago. By the time he reached his truck, parked on the dirt road near the cabin, his arms were screaming and his lungs burned. He yanked open the passenger door and laid her across the seat as gently as he could, then ran around to the driver's side. The engine roared to life, and he threw the truck into gear, tires spinning in the mud before finding purchase. The drive back to the cabin took less than 5 minutes, but it felt like an eternity. Luke kept glancing at the woman, watching her chest rise and fall, praying she'd keep breathing. He didn't know who she was or what had happened to her, but he knew one thing for certain. If he didn't get her inside and warm soon, she was going to die. He pulled up to the cabin and killed the engine, then jumped out and ran to the passenger side. Eli was standing in the doorway, rubbing sleep from his eyes, his small face twisted with confusion. "Dad?" the boy called out, his voice high and uncertain. "What's going on?" "Get inside, Eli," Luke said, lifting the woman from the truck. "Now!" Eli's eyes went wide when he saw her, but he didn't argue. He stepped back, holding the door open, and Luke carried the woman inside. The cabin was small, just 2 rooms, a living area with a kitchenette and a bedroom that Luke and Eli shared. He laid her on the couch, the same couch Eli had been sleeping on moments before, and grabbed every blanket he could find. "Dad, is she dead?" Eli whispered, his voice trembling. "No," Luke said, though he wasn't entirely sure. "But she's hurt bad. I need you to be brave, okay? Can you do that for me?" Eli nodded, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. Luke turned his attention back to the woman. Her breathing was still shallow, her skin cold and clammy. He stripped off her soaked coat and shirt, trying not to think about the intimacy of it, and examined her wounds. The gash on her ribs was deep, but it had mostly stopped bleeding. The head wound was worse, a jagged cut above her left eyebrow that would need stitches. He didn't have the supplies or the expertise for that, but he had clean water, bandages, and enough basic first aid knowledge to keep her alive until morning. He worked quickly, his hands steady despite the fear gnawing at his gut. He cleaned the wounds with warm water and soap, packed them with gauze, and wrapped her torso with bandages he'd salvaged from an old emergency kit. She didn't wake, didn't even flinch, and that scared him more than anything. When he was finished, he covered her with every blanket he had, then built up the fire in the wood stove until the cabin was almost too warm. Eli sat cross-legged on the floor nearby, watching in silence, his face pale. "Who is she?" Eli finally asked. "I don't know, buddy," Luke said, sinking into the armchair across from the couch. "But we're going to take care of her, okay?" "Is she going to be okay?" Luke looked at the woman, at her pale face, her shallow breathing, the way her fingers twitched slightly beneath the blankets, and didn't have an answer. "I hope so," he said. The first night was the longest. Luke didn't sleep. He sat in the armchair watching the woman's chest rise and fall, listening to the rasp of her breathing. Every few hours, he checked her pulse, adjusted her blankets, and pressed a cool cloth to her forehead. Her fever spiked around midnight, her skin burning hot to the touch, and Luke spent the next hour sponging her down with cold water, praying the fever would break. Eli had fallen asleep on the floor, wrapped in a spare blanket, his small body curled up like a comma. Luke glanced at his son and felt a pang of guilt. This wasn't the life he'd wanted for the boy, living in a rundown cabin, barely scraping by, now playing host to a dying stranger. But it was the life they had, and Luke had learned a long time ago that you didn't get to choose your circumstances. You just got to choose how you dealt with them. By dawn, the woman's fever had broken. Her breathing evened out, and some of the color returned to her face. Luke finally allowed himself to relax, leaning back in the chair and closing his eyes for just a moment. When he woke, the sun was streaming through the cabin's single window, and Eli was standing beside the couch, staring down at the woman. "She's pretty," Eli said quietly. Luke rubbed his eyes and stood, his back aching from the awkward angle he'd slept in. "Don't stare, son." "Is she awake yet?" "Not yet." But as if on cue, the woman's eyes fluttered open. She blinked slowly, her gaze unfocused, and her lips parted as if she wanted to speak but couldn't find the words. "Hey," Luke said, stepping closer. Take it easy. You're safe." Her eyes darted around the cabin, taking in the wood stove, the rough-hewn walls, the boy standing beside her, and panic flashed across her face. She tried to sit up, but Luke gently pressed a hand to her shoulder. "Easy," he said again. "You're hurt. You've been out for almost a day." She stared at him, her chest heaving, and Luke could see the fear in her eyes. She didn't know him, didn't know where she was. For all she knew, he was the one who'd hurt her. "My name's Luke," he said, keeping his voice calm and steady. "This is my son, Eli. I found you in the woods last night, near the creek. You were hurt bad. I brought you here." The woman's breathing slowed slightly, and she glanced down at her bandaged torso. Her fingers touched the gauze lightly, as if testing to see if it was real. "Do you remember what happened?" Luke asked. She opened her mouth, closed it, then shook her head. I don't know. I can't. There was a car. Rain. Someone chasing me. I ran. I think I crashed." Her voice was hoarse, barely above a whisper. "Do you know your name?" She closed her eyes, her brow furrowing in concentration. Ava. I think... Ava." "Okay, Ava," Luke said. "That's good. Do you remember anything else? Where you were going? Who was chasing you?" She shook her head again, and tears welled up in her eyes. "I don't know. I don't remember." Luke exchanged a glance with Eli, who was watching the woman with wide, solemn eyes. This was bad. If someone had been chasing her, if she'd crashed her car and ended up bleeding out in the woods, that meant trouble. The kind of trouble Luke had spent the last 2 years trying to avoid. But looking at her now, broken, scared, with nowhere else to go, he couldn't just turn her away. "All right," he said. "You can stay here until you're strong enough to leave. But if you remember anything at all, you tell me, okay?" Ava nodded, her eyes still wet with tears. "Eli, go get some water," Luke said, and his son scrambled to obey. As Eli filled a glass from the kitchen tap, Luke pulled a chair close to the couch and sat down. "I'm going to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me." Ava looked at him, her expression wary. "Are you in danger? Is someone going to come looking for you?" For a long moment, she didn't answer. Then quietly she said, "I think so." Luke's stomach dropped. "You think so, or you know so?" "I don't know," she said, her voice breaking. "I can't remember, but I feel it, like I'm running from something, someone." Luke leaned back in his chair and ran a hand through his hair. This was exactly what he'd been afraid of. He should have known better, should have stayed on that porch and minded his own business. But it was too late now. She was here, and whatever danger she was running from, it was his problem too. "All right," he said after a moment. "We'll figure it out. But for now, you need to rest. Get your strength back." Ava nodded, and Eli returned with the water. She drank it slowly, her hands shaking, and when she was finished, she lay back down and closed her eyes. Luke watched her for a while, then stood and walked to the window. Outside, the storm had passed, leaving the forest wet and gleaming in the morning light. Everything looked peaceful, normal. But Luke knew better. Peace never lasted long, not for men like him. And something told him that whatever storm Ava had brought with her, it was only just beginning. The second day passed in a strange, tense quiet. Ava slept most of the time, her body exhausted from blood loss and trauma. When she was awake, she ate the soup Luke made for her, a simple chicken broth with vegetables from the garden, and answered his questions as best she could. But her memory remained fragmented, bits and pieces that didn't quite fit together. She remembered driving, rain on the windshield, headlights in the rearview mirror getting closer, a voice on the phone, urgent, angry, then nothing, just darkness and pain. Luke didn't push her. He knew from experience that memories like that had a way of surfacing when they were ready. Forcing them only made things worse. Instead, he focused on keeping her comfortable and safe. He changed her bandages twice a day, made sure she drank plenty of water, and kept the fire going so the cabin stayed warm. Eli helped where he could, bringing her blankets and sitting beside her when she was awake, telling her stories about school in the woods and the raccoon family that lived under the porch. Ava listened, a faint smile on her lips. and Luke could see something softening in her eyes. She was scared, but she was starting to trust them, and that made Luke's chest tighten with a feeling he couldn't quite name. On the evening of the second day, Luke was outside splitting firewood when he heard a noise that made him freeze. A car engine. Distant, but getting closer. He dropped the axe and ran to the front of the cabin, peering down the dirt road. Nothing yet, but the sound was unmistakable. A vehicle coming up the mountain. "Eli!" he called, keeping his voice low but urgent. "Get inside. Now!" Eli appeared in the doorway, his face confused. "What's wrong?" "Just do what I say." The boy disappeared inside and Luke followed, his heart pounding. He found Ava awake, sitting up on the couch, her eyes wide. "Someone's coming," she whispered. "Yeah," Luke said. He moved to the window and pulled back the curtain just enough to see out. 2 black SUVs were crawling up the road, their tires crunching on gravel. "Do you know who they are?" Luke asked. Ava's face had gone pale. I don't know, but I feel like I should." The vehicle stopped about 50 yards from the cabin, and 4 men stepped out. They were dressed in suits, expensive looking, and they moved with the kind of precision that told Luke they weren't local cops or park rangers. These were professionals. One of them pulled out a badge and started walking toward the cabin. "Stay here," Luke said to Ava, "and stay quiet." He opened the door before the men could knock, stepping out onto the porch and closing the door behind him. He crossed his arms and waited, his expression carefully neutral. The man with the badge stopped at the base of the porch steps. He was tall, mid-40s, with sharp features and cold eyes. "Afternoon," he said, his voice smooth and polite. "Sorry to bother you. We're looking for a missing person, a woman. She was involved in a car accident a couple days ago, and we have reason to believe she might have wandered into this area." Luke kept his face blank. "Haven't seen anyone." The man smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "You sure about that? This is pretty remote. If someone was hurt, lost, they might have come to your cabin for help." "Like I said, I haven't seen anyone." The man studied him for a moment, then glanced at the other men who had fanned out around the property. One of them was peering through the cabin's window, and Luke's hands clenched into fists. "You live here alone?" the man asked. "Me and my son." "Mind if we take a look inside, just to make sure?" Luke's jaw tightened. "You got a warrant?" The man's smile widened. "We're not cops. We're private contractors hired by the woman's family. They're worried about her. Just want to make sure she's safe." "Then you won't mind coming back with a warrant," Luke said evenly. The man's expression hardened, and for a moment Luke thought he was going to push the issue. But then he stepped back, slipping the badge into his pocket. "All right," he said. "We'll be on our way. But if you see anyone, give us a call." He pulled out a business card and held it out. Luke didn't take it. "I'll keep an eye out." The man dropped the card on the porch steps, then turned and walked back to the SUVs. The other men followed, and within minutes they were gone, disappearing down the road in a cloud of dust. Luke waited until the sound of their engines faded completely before going back inside. Ava was standing now, her face white, her hands gripping the back of the couch. "They're looking for me," she whispered. "Yeah," Luke said, "and they're not cops." Ava sank back down onto the couch, her legs giving out. "I remember now. Not everything, but enough. They work for the company. My company. They're the ones who tried to kill me." Luke stared at her, his pulse still racing. "Who the hell are you?" Ava looked up at him, her eyes filled with fear and something else. Determination. "My name is Ava Sinclair," she said, "and I'm the CEO of Sinclair Dynamics." Luke's blood ran cold. He'd heard that name before, seen it on billboards, in the news. Sinclair Dynamics was a massive corporation worth billions, with contracts in defense, technology, aerospace. And if what Ava was saying was true, then the men who'd just been at his door weren't just dangerous. They were lethal. "Jesus Christ," Luke muttered, running a hand through his hair. "What the hell did you do?" Ava's voice was barely a whisper. "I refused to sell." And in that moment, Luke realized that saving her life might have just put his and Eli's in danger. But it was too late to turn back now. The silence that followed Ava's confession was thick enough to choke on. Luke stood frozen in the middle of his cabin, staring at the woman on his couch. This woman who'd just revealed herself to be one of the most powerful people in the country. Ava Sinclair. The name echoed in his mind, connecting to fragments of news stories he'd half heard on the radio, billboards he'd seen driving through Portland, articles Eli's teacher had mentioned about women in business. And now she was here, bleeding through his bandages, hunted by men who moved like soldiers. "Say that again," Luke said slowly, his voice rough. Ava met his eyes, and he could see she was trembling. "Sinclair Dynamics. It's my company. I built it from nothing, and now the board wants to take it from me." "Why?" She drew in a shaky breath, pressing one hand against her bandaged ribs. "Because I wouldn't sell our defense contracts to a foreign buyer. The board saw dollar signs, billions of them. I saw treason. We fought about it for months, and then—" She closed her eyes. "Then they decided I was the problem." Luke's mind raced, trying to process what she was telling him. "So they what? Tried to kill you? Staged a car accident?" "I think so." Ava's voice cracked. "I was driving back from a meeting in Seattle. It was late, raining. A car started following me on the highway, getting closer, forcing me off the road. I tried to lose them, but they rammed me from behind. I remember spinning, crashing through a guardrail, and then darkness. When I woke up, I was in the woods, and I knew I had to run. I knew if they found me alive, they'd finish what they started." Eli had been standing in the corner, listening with wide eyes, and now he spoke up, his voice small. "Dad, are we in trouble?" Luke looked at his son, at the fear written across his young face, and felt rage boil up inside him. This wasn't supposed to happen. They'd come to these mountains to escape trouble, to live quietly, and let the world forget about them. But somehow, trouble had found them anyway, bleeding and desperate on his doorstep. "Nobody," Luke said, forcing his voice to stay calm. "We're okay." But even as he said it, he knew it was a lie. Those men would be back. They'd seen his face, knew where he lived, and if they suspected he was hiding Ava, they'd come back with more than questions. "We need to call the police," Luke said, turning back to Ava. "Real police, FBI, whoever handles this kind of thing." "No." Ava's response was immediate and sharp. "You can't." "Why the hell not?" "Because I don't know who to trust." She stood up slowly, wincing with the effort, and Luke moved to help her, but she waved him off. "The board has connections everywhere. Politicians, law enforcement, judges. If word gets out that I'm alive before I can get somewhere safe, before I can gather evidence, they'll make sure I disappear for good. And anyone who helped me—" She looked at Eli, and her expression softened with guilt. "Anyone who helped me becomes a liability, too." Luke felt the weight of her words settle over him like a blanket of lead. He'd been a fool to bring her here, a fool to think he could play hero without consequences. But what else could he have done? Left her to die in the woods? "So what do you want me to do?" he asked, his voice tight with frustration. "Just keep you here and hope those men don't come back?" "I don't know." Ava's voice broke again, and tears spilled down her cheeks. "I don't know what to do. I can barely remember what happened. I don't have my phone, my wallet, any way to contact people I trust. All I know is that I can't let them find me. Not yet." Luke paced to the window and stared out at the darkening forest. The sun was setting behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. It should have been beautiful. Instead, it just felt like time running out. "Dad?" Eli's voice pulled him back. "What are we going to do?" Luke looked at his son, then at Ava, then back out at the woods. Every instinct he had screamed at him to pack up, drive Ava into town, drop her at a hospital, and wash his hands of the whole mess. But another part of him, the part that had carried her out of those woods, that had stayed up all night making sure she kept breathing, that part couldn't walk away. "We're going to keep her safe," Luke said finally. "At least for tonight. Then we figure out a plan." Ava wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "Thank you. I know I have no right to ask this of you." "You're right," Luke interrupted. "You don't. But I'm not going to throw you back to the wolves either." He turned to Eli. "Buddy, I need you to do something for me." Go into the bedroom and pack a bag. Clothes, your toothbrush, that book you've been reading. Just in case we need to leave in a hurry." Eli's eyes went even wider, but he nodded and hurried toward the bedroom. Once the boy was out of earshot, Luke moved closer to Ava, lowering his voice. "I need you to tell me everything you remember, every detail, even if it doesn't seem important. Because if those men come back, I need to know what we're up against." Ava nodded and sank back onto the couch. Over the next hour, as darkness fell completely outside and the cabin's single lamp cast long shadows across the walls, she told him everything she could remember. She'd started Sinclair Dynamics 15 years ago, fresh out of MIT with a master's in aerospace engineering and nothing but student debt and ambition. The company had begun small, consulting contracts, research grants, but Ava had a gift for innovation and an even greater gift for recognizing talent. She'd hired the best engineers, the brightest minds, and within 5 years, Sinclair Dynamics had become a major player in defense technology. The contracts had rolled in: drones, guidance systems, satellite technology. The military loved her, Congress praised her, and the money flowed like water. She'd taken the company public, made her investors rich, and built an empire. But empires always attracted vultures. 6 months ago, a consortium of international buyers had approached the board with an offer that made everyone's eyes light up. They wanted to purchase Sinclair's entire defense portfolio, every patent, every design, every piece of technology, for a sum that would have made the board members wealthy beyond imagination. "It was too much money," Ava explained, her voice hollow. "Way more than the tech was worth. That's what made me suspicious. So I dug deeper, hired private investigators, and found out the consortium was a front. The real buyers were foreign intelligence agencies, countries we don't exactly have friendly relationships with." Luke's jaw tightened, and the board didn't care. Some of them didn't know, but the ones who did— She shook her head. "They saw it as a business opportunity. They said it was legal, that we'd be selling to private entities, not governments directly. They claimed it was no different than any other deal. But you knew better. I knew that our technology would end up in the hands of people who'd use it against us, against American soldiers, against our allies. I couldn't let that happen." Her voice grew stronger, more defiant. "So I refused. I blocked the sale, used my authority as CEO to kill the deal. And that's when everything went wrong." The board had turned on her. Suddenly she was facing votes of no confidence, accusations of mismanagement, whispers about her mental stability. They tried to force her out legally, but Ava had fought back with lawyers and proxy votes and every trick she knew. "I thought I was winning," she said bitterly. "I thought I could outlast them, expose what they were trying to do, but then someone decided legal battles took too long. The car accident, the chase, the crash that was supposed to kill her. They made it look like I'd been driving drunk," Ava continued. "I found out later, one of my assistants called me before I lost my phone. They'd already released a statement saying I died in a single car accident, that there was alcohol in my system. They even held a memorial service." Luke sat back, stunned. "So the whole world thinks you're dead?" "Yes. And those men who came here were sent to make sure it stayed that way." Ava's expression hardened. "They're not police. They're private security. The kind you hire when you need something done quietly." Luke thought about the man with the badge, the cold eyes, the way the others had moved around his property, like they were conducting a military operation. "They didn't look like they were here to save you." "No," Ava agreed. "They were here to finish the job." A floorboard creaked, and both of them turned to see Eli standing in the doorway to the bedroom, his backpack slung over one shoulder. "I packed," he said quietly. Luke's heart broke a little at the sight of his son, so small and scared but trying to be brave. "Good job, buddy. Why don't you get ready for bed? It's been a long day." "Are you going to sleep?" "Not yet, but I'll be right here, I promise." Eli nodded and disappeared back into the bedroom. Luke waited until he heard the boy climbing into bed, then turned back to Ava. "We can't stay here," he said quietly. "You know that, right? If they come back—" "I know." Ava looked down at her hands. "But I don't know where to go. I don't know who I can trust. What about family, friends?" "My parents are dead. I don't have siblings, and my friends—"
She laughed bitterly. Most of them were connected to the company. I can't risk reaching out to anyone until I know they're not compromised. Luke ran a hand through his hair, thinking. They needed help, real help. But where could they get it without putting themselves at greater risk? There's a guy I used to know, he said slowly, back when I was in the service. Army buddy. He lives about 3 hours from here, runs a security consulting business. If anyone would know how to handle this kind of situation, it's him. Ava looked up, hope flickering in her eyes. Can you trust him? With my life, Luke said. He's gotten me out of tight spots before. If I call him, he'll help. No questions asked. Then call him. Luke hesitated. Involving Marcus would mean dragging another person into this nightmare. But Marcus was trained for this kind of thing.
He'd know what to do, how to keep them safe, maybe even how to help Ava expose what her board had done. All right, Luke said, but I'm not calling from here. If they're monitoring anything, I don't want to give them more information than they already have. I'll drive into town tomorrow. Use a payphone. Tomorrow might be too late. It's going to have to be. Luke stood up and moved to the door, checking the lock. Those men won't come back tonight. They're professionals. They'll regroup, make a plan, probably wait until they have more information. That gives us a window. Ava wrapped her arms around herself, still shivering despite the warmth of the cabin. I'm so sorry I brought this to your door. Yeah, well, Luke's voice softened. You didn't exactly have a choice. They sat in silence for a while, the only sound the crackling of the fire in the wood stove. Outside, an owl hooted somewhere in the darkness, and the wind rustled through the pines. Luke thought about how peaceful this place had been before tonight, how he'd actually started to believe he and Eli could build a life here away from the chaos of the world. That peace felt like a lifetime ago now. Can I ask you something? Ava said quietly. Luke looked over at her. Sure. Why did you help me? When you found me in the woods, you could have just called for help and walked away. Why didn't you? It was a good question, and Luke didn't have a simple answer. He thought about it for a moment, about the sound of her crying in the darkness, about the way she'd looked so close to death, about Eli and the kind of man Luke wanted his son to become. I guess I couldn't live with myself if I'd left you there, he said finally. My ex-wife used to say I had a savior complex. Maybe she was right. I think she was wrong. Ava's voice was soft. I think you're just a good man. Luke huffed a bitter laugh. Not many people would agree with you on that. Then they don't know you. There was something in the way she said it, in the way she looked at him, that made Luke's chest tighten. He cleared his throat and stood up, suddenly needing distance. You should get some rest, he said. I'll keep watch tonight. You need to sleep too. I'll sleep when I know we're safe. Ava started to argue, but stopped when she saw the set of his jaw. Instead, she nodded and lay back down on the couch, pulling the blankets up to her chin. Within minutes, exhaustion claimed her and she was asleep. Luke settled into the armchair by the window, his hunting rifle across his lap. He'd never been much of a soldier. His time in the army had been brief, cut short by an injury that had left him with a bum knee and a medical discharge. But he remembered enough to know how to keep watch, how to listen for sounds that didn't belong. The hours crawled by. Midnight came and went. Luke's eyes burned with fatigue, but he didn't let himself close them for more than a few seconds at a time. Every rustle of leaves outside, every snap of a branch, had him on edge. Around 2 a.m, Ava woke with a gasp, sitting bolt upright on the couch. Luke was beside her in an instant. Hey, it's okay, he said quietly. You're safe. Just a nightmare. But Ava's eyes were wide, unfocused, and she grabbed his arm with surprising strength. The files, she whispered urgently. Oh God, I just remembered. The files. What files? Before the accident, I uploaded everything to a secure server. All the evidence about the deal, the board's involvement, emails, financial records. I was planning to take it to the SEC, maybe even the FBI. But I never got the chance. Luke's pulse quickened. Where? Where are the files? A private server. But I need a computer to access it, and the passwords. She pressed her hands to her temples. I can barely remember my own name right now. The passwords are complex, encrypted. I'd need time to piece them together. If you can access those files, could you prove what they did? Yes. Ava looked at him with something like hope in her eyes. If I can get to them, I can bring down everyone involved. But I'd need protection first. Witness protection, federal protection, something. Because the moment I go public with this, they'll come for me with everything they have. Luke thought about his friend Marcus. This was way above his pay grade, but Marcus would know people. He had contacts in law enforcement, in the intelligence community. If anyone could help Ava navigate this mess, it was him. Okay, Luke said. First thing tomorrow, I make the call. We get you somewhere safe, get you the protection you need, and then you nail these bastards. Ava nodded, some of the tension leaving her shoulders. Thank you. I mean it. Thank you. Luke squeezed her hand briefly, then returned to his post by the window. The rest of the night passed without incident, but he couldn't shake the feeling that they were sitting on borrowed time. Those men would be back. It was just a question of when. Dawn broke cold and gray, the sky heavy with the promise of more rain. Luke made coffee and breakfast, scrambled eggs and toast, while Ava and Eli ate in tired silence. The boy kept stealing glances at Ava, clearly curious but too polite to ask the 1,000 questions Luke knew were bouncing around in his head. Eli, Luke said as he cleared the plates, I need to run into town for a little while. You're going to stay here with Miss Sinclair. Can you do that? Eli nodded, though Luke could see the worry in his eyes. How long? Couple hours. Maybe less. I need you to keep the doors locked, okay? And if anyone comes by, anyone at all, you don't answer. You keep quiet and you stay hidden. Understand? Yes, sir. Luke turned to Ava. There's a shotgun in the bedroom closet, top shelf. You know how to use one? Ava hesitated, then nodded. My father taught me when I was young. I haven't touched one in years, but I remember. Good. If anyone tries to get in, you use it. Don't hesitate. Don't warn them. Just shoot. He could see the fear in her eyes, but also determination. I will. Luke pulled on his jacket and grabbed his truck keys, pausing at the door. I'll be back soon. Stay sharp. The drive into town felt longer than usual. Luke kept checking his rearview mirror, watching for any sign of a tail, but the road behind him stayed empty. The town itself was small, just a handful of shops, a gas station, and a diner that served breakfast all day. He parked near the diner and walked to the phone booth on the corner. His hands shook slightly as he fed coins into the slot and dialed Marcus's number. The phone rang 3 times before a gruff voice answered. Yeah? Marcus, it's Luke. There was a pause. Luke Bennett? Damn, man. It's been, what, 2 years? About that. Listen, I need your help. Big help. Marcus's tone shifted immediately. All business. What's going on? I can't explain over the phone. But I've got someone here, someone important, and she's in serious danger, corporate hit squad type danger. I need to know how to get her into protective custody, and I need it to happen fast. Another pause, longer this time. Jesus, Luke, what did you get yourself into? I'll explain everything when I see you. Can you help or not? Yeah, I can help. But you need to get her somewhere safe first, somewhere they can't trace. You still at that cabin? For now. That's no good. Too isolated, too easy to trap. You need to move. There's a motel outside Eugene, off Highway 126. The Ponderosa. Owner's an old friend, won't ask questions. Get her there, and I'll meet you tonight with some people who can help. Luke memorized the name and address. What time? 8 o'clock. Room 14. I'll have it reserved under the name Collins. Got it, Marcus. Don't thank me yet. Just get moving. And Luke, watch your back. If these people are who you say they are, they won't stop until the job's done. The line went dead. Luke hung up the phone and stood there for a moment, the weight of what he was about to do settling over him. He was taking Eli away from the only home they'd known, putting them both at risk, all to help a woman he'd met 48 hours ago. But what choice did he have? Let her die? Let those men win? No. He'd made his choice the moment he carried her out of those woods. Luke climbed back into his truck and started the engine. He was halfway back to the cabin when he spotted them. 2 black SUVs, the same ones from yesterday, parked on a logging road that branched off the main highway. He slowed down, his heart pounding, and as he passed he caught a glimpse of the men inside. They were watching the road, waiting for him to come back. Luke's hands tightened on the steering wheel. They'd staked out his route, Probably figured he'd have to leave for supplies eventually, which meant they were closing in. Maybe they already knew Ava was in the cabin. Maybe they were just waiting for confirmation. Either way, time had just run out. He pressed the accelerator, taking the curves faster than he should have, and burst into the cabin 10 minutes later. Ava was standing by the window with the shotgun in her hands, and Eli was crouched behind the couch. "What happened?" Ava asked, seeing his face. "They're watching the road. We need to leave. Now." Luke grabbed his go-bag from the bedroom, threw in some extra clothes and all the cash he had, then helped Ava gather her things, which amounted to the clothes on her back and the coat he'd cleaned for her. Eli already had his backpack, his small face set with determination. "Where are we going?" Ava asked as Luke herded them toward the truck. "Somewhere safer. I've got a friend who's going to help, but we have to move fast." They piled into the truck, Luke behind the wheel, Ava in the passenger seat, and Eli in the back. Luke took a different route this time, an old fire road that wound through the mountains and eventually connected to a highway 20 miles south. It was rough going, the truck bouncing over ruts and rocks, but it would keep them off the main road. They'd been driving for about 15 minutes when Ava suddenly gasped. "Stop! Stop the truck!" Luke slammed on the brakes. "What? What is it?" Ava was staring at her hands, her breathing rapid. I remember the password, the files, I can access them, but I need a computer. Do you have one?" "At the cabin, but no, not there. Somewhere else, somewhere with internet." Luke thought fast. "There's a library in Eugene, but that's risky. It's public, lots of cameras." "It's also safe," Ava countered. "They won't expect me to walk into a public place, and libraries have private study rooms. I can get in, download the files to a thumb drive, and get out. 30 minutes, tops." Luke wanted to argue, wanted to tell her it was too dangerous, but he could see the fire in her eyes, the desperate need to fight back instead of just running. And if she really could access evidence that would expose everything, it might be their only chance to end this without spending the rest of their lives looking over their shoulders. "All right," he said, "but we do this smart. You get in, get what you need, and get out. No heroics." Ava nodded, and Luke put the truck back in gear. They drove in tense silence, every mile feeling like a countdown. When they finally reached Eugene, Luke parked 2 blocks from the library and made Ava put on a baseball cap and sunglasses he'd had in the glove box. She looked ridiculous, like someone trying very hard not to look suspicious, but it was better than nothing. "Eli, you stay in the truck with me," Luke said. "Keep your head down." "I can help." "No, you stay here. That's final." The boy slumped in his seat, disappointed but obedient. Ava climbed out of the truck, moving stiffly because of her injuries, and Luke watched her walk toward the library entrance. She disappeared inside, and then there was nothing to do but wait. The minutes crawled by. 5, 10, 15. Luke kept checking his watch, his leg bouncing with nervous energy. Eli was quiet in the back seat, staring out the window. "Dad?" the boy said after a while. "Are we going to be okay?" Luke met his son's eyes in the rearview mirror. "Yeah, buddy, we're going to be fine." "You promise?" Luke wanted to promise, wanted to tell his son that everything would work out, that they'd go back to their quiet life in the mountains and forget any of this ever happened. But he'd learned a long time ago that promises like that were just pretty lies. "I promise I'll do everything I can to keep you safe," he said instead. "That's the best I can give you." Eli nodded, seeming to understand. 20 minutes, 25. Luke was about to go in after her when Ava emerged from the library, moving quickly but not running. She had a thumb drive clutched in her hand and a look of grim satisfaction on her face. She climbed into the truck and held up the drive. "I got it. Everything. Emails, financial transactions, meeting notes, enough to put half the board in prison and destroy the others." Luke let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. "Good. Now we get you to the motel, meet Marcus, and hand this over to someone who can actually do something with it." He started the engine and pulled out into traffic. They were going to make it. They were actually going to. A black SUV appeared in his rearview mirror. Luke's blood turned to ice. "We've got company." Ava twisted in her seat, saw the vehicle, and went pale. "How did they find us?" "I don't know." Luke's mind raced. Had they been followed from the cabin? Had someone spotted them in town? It didn't matter. What mattered was losing them. He took a sharp right turn, the truck's tires squealing, and accelerated down a side street. The SUV followed, closing the distance. Luke took another turn, then another, trying to navigate the unfamiliar streets, but the SUV stayed on them like a shadow. "Hold on," Luke said, and floored it. They shot through a red light, horns blaring around them, and Luke took a hard left onto a highway on-ramp. The truck's engine roared as he pushed it faster, weaving between cars. The SUV kept pace, and Luke realized with sinking dread that they weren't going to outrun them. Not in his old pickup. "There," Ava said, pointing. "The mall. Lots of people, lots of exits. We can lose them on foot." It was risky, but Luke didn't have a better option. He yanked the wheel and careened into the mall parking lot, threading between cars until he found a spot near the entrance. They all jumped out, and Luke grabbed Eli's hand. "Run," he said. "Don't look back." They sprinted toward the mall entrance, pushing through the doors just as the SUV screeched to a stop behind them. Inside, the mall was crowded with afternoon shoppers, and Luke used that to their advantage, pulling Ava and Eli deep into the crowd. Behind them, he caught glimpses of the men from the SUV, moving through the mall with predatory efficiency. They were splitting up, searching. Luke ducked into a department store, leading Ava and Eli through racks of clothing toward the back exit. But when they reached it, another man was waiting, blocking their path. Luke didn't hesitate. He threw a punch that connected with the man's jaw, sending him stumbling back. Then Luke grabbed a nearby mannequin and swung it like a club, buying them precious seconds to slip past. They burst out of the back exit into a loading area, and Luke spotted a delivery truck idling near the dock. Without thinking, he pulled open the back door and pushed Ava and Eli inside. "Stay down and stay quiet," he hissed, then slammed the door shut. He circled around to the driver's side, yanked open the door, and found a startled delivery driver staring at him. "Sorry about this," Luke said, and pulled the guy out of the truck. He jumped into the driver's seat, threw the truck into gear, and drove. Behind him, he could hear shouting, but they were already pulling out onto the street, disappearing into traffic. Luke drove for 5 miles before pulling into an alley and letting Ava and Eli out of the back. They were both shaken, but unharmed. "That was insane," Ava breathed. "Yeah," Luke agreed, his hands still shaking from adrenaline. It was. But they'd made it. They'd escaped. And more importantly, they still had the thumb drive. Now they just had to survive long enough to use it. Luke ditched the delivery truck 3 blocks later in a grocery store parking lot, wiping down the steering wheel with his shirt even though his hands were still trembling. They couldn't afford to leave any more traces than they already had. Ava leaned against the side of the truck, one hand pressed to her ribs, her face gray with pain and exhaustion. Eli stood close to his father, silent and wide-eyed, processing everything that had just happened in that terrifying mall chase. "We need another vehicle," Luke said, scanning the parking lot. His own truck was back at the mall, probably surrounded by those men by now. They'd have his license plate, which meant they'd have his name, which meant they'd know everything about him within the hour. "There," Ava pointed to an older model sedan parked near the back of the lot, away from the security cameras. "That one." Luke stared at her. "You want me to steal a car? You just stole a delivery truck." "That was different. That was survival." "And this isn't?" Ava's voice was sharp, edged with desperation. "Luke, they're hunting us. Your truck is compromised. We need transportation, and we need it now." Luke looked at his son, saw the fear in Eli's eyes, and felt something hard settle in his chest. She was right. They'd crossed so many lines already. What was one more? "Stay here," he told them, and approached the sedan. He'd learned to hotwire cars during a misspent youth he rarely talked about. Skills from a time before the army, before he tried to straighten out his life. His fingers fumbled with the wires beneath the steering column, muscle memory kicking in after all these years. The engine coughed, sputtered, then roared to life. Ava and Eli were in the car seconds later, and Luke pulled out of the parking lot with his heart hammering against his ribs. He was a thief now. Add it to the growing list of crimes he was committing to keep this woman alive. "Where to?" Ava asked, clutching the thumb drive like it was a lifeline. Luke checked the clock on the dashboard. 4 in the afternoon. They had 4 hours until the meeting with Marcus. 4 hours to stay invisible, to keep moving, to not get caught or killed. "We need to get out of the city," he said. "Find somewhere to lay low until tonight." He drove aimlessly for 20 minutes, taking random turns, doubling back, making sure no one was following them. His mind raced with possibilities and consequences. Those men had found them at the library, which meant they either had been following them all along or had somehow tracked them. But how? Luke had been careful, had taken back roads, had... "Your phone," Ava said suddenly, as if reading his thoughts. "Do you have your phone on you?" Luke's stomach dropped. He pulled the phone from his pocket and stared at it like it was a snake. "They can track this?" "If they have the resources I think they do, yes. They probably pinged your location the moment you made that call this morning." Jesus. Luke rolled down the window and threw the phone out, watching it shatter on the asphalt. "I'm an idiot." "You didn't know?" Ava's voice was gentler now. "None of this is your fault." But it felt like his fault. He'd brought danger to his son, had gotten them tangled up in something way over their heads, and now they were running for their lives in a stolen car with no plan beyond surviving the next few hours. They drove in silence for a while, leaving Eugene behind and heading into the rural areas beyond the city limits. The landscape shifted from suburbs to farmland, wide open fields broken up by patches of forest. Luke finally pulled off onto a dirt road that led to an abandoned farm, the kind of place that had been foreclosed on years ago and left to rot. A collapsing barn leaned dangerously to one side, and the farmhouse was little more than a skeleton of broken windows and peeling paint. "We'll wait here," Luke said, parking the car behind the barn where it couldn't be seen from the road. "It's not perfect, but it'll do." They got out, and Luke immediately checked their surroundings, his military training kicking in despite how rusty it had become. The area was quiet, isolated. No neighbors for miles. If someone found them here, they'd have nowhere to run, but the alternative was staying mobile and risking another encounter on the road. Ava sank down onto the barn's front step, her face pale. "I need to rest. Just for a few minutes." "Let me check your bandages," Luke said, kneeling beside her. He carefully lifted her shirt. She didn't protest, and examined the wound on her ribs. The bandages were soaked through with blood and sweat, and the skin around the gash was inflamed. "This needs proper medical attention," Luke said quietly. "It's getting infected." "I know." Ava's voice was barely a whisper. "But we can't risk a hospital. Not yet." Luke had a first aid kit in his go bag, basic supplies he'd grabbed from the cabin. He cleaned the wound as best he could with antiseptic wipes, applied fresh gauze, and wrapped new bandages around her torso. His hands were steady now, focused on the task, and he tried not to think about how close she'd come to dying, how close she still was. "Thank you," Ava said when he finished. She caught his hand before he could pull away, her fingers cool against his skin. "For everything. I know I keep saying it, but I mean it. You didn't have to do any of this." Luke met her eyes and saw something there that made his chest tighten. Gratitude, yes, but also something deeper. Trust. Maybe even affection. It scared him more than the men with guns. "Don't thank me yet," he said, pulling his hand away gently. "We're not out of this." Eli had been exploring the area around the barn, and now he came running back, his face excited. "Dad, there's a creek back there, and I saw a deer." Luke managed to smile despite everything. "That's great, buddy. But stay close, okay? Don't wander too far." "I won't." Eli settled down next to Ava, pulling out a crumpled comic book from his backpack. "Miss Sinclair, do you like superheroes?" Ava looked surprised by the question, then smiled. "I used to. When I was your age, I wanted to be Wonder Woman." "Really?" Eli's eyes lit up. "I like Spider-Man. He's smart, and he helps people even when it's hard." "That's a good hero to admire," Ava said softly. She glanced at Luke. "He reminds me of someone else I know." Luke felt heat creep up his neck and turned away, uncomfortable with the comparison. He wasn't a hero. Heroes didn't steal cars and run from their problems. Heroes didn't put their kids in danger. The afternoon dragged on, each minute feeling like an hour. Luke kept watch from the barn, scanning the road for any sign of approaching vehicles. Ava dozed fitfully, and Eli read his comic book, occasionally asking questions about the story that Ava answered with surprising patience. Around 6 o'clock, as the sun began its descent toward the horizon, Ava woke with a start. For a moment she looked confused, disoriented. Then her eyes found Luke and she relaxed slightly. How long was I out?
Couple hours. How are you feeling? Like I got hit by a truck. She sat up slowly, wincing. But better than yesterday. Luke handed her a bottle of water and a protein bar from his supplies. It's not much, but you need to eat something. She took them gratefully, and they ate in silence while Eli played with a stick he'd found, drawing pictures in the dirt. The scene was almost peaceful, almost normal, if you ignored the fact that they were fugitives hiding in an abandoned barn. Can I ask you something? Ava said after a while. Luke nodded. Why did you leave the army? You said you were medically discharged, but what?
I don't know. You don't seem disabled, and you move like someone who's seen combat, who knows how to handle himself in dangerous situations. Luke was quiet for a long moment, debating how much to tell her. But she'd shared her story, had trusted him with everything. Maybe she deserved some truth in return. I was part of a supply convoy in Afghanistan, he said, his voice low so Eli wouldn't hear. We got hit by an IED. 3 guys died instantly. 4 more were badly wounded. I took shrapnel in my leg and back. Nothing life-threatening, but enough to mess me up. They patched me up, sent me back to base, and I did physical therapy for 6 months. But you recovered. Physically, yeah. Mentally. He shook his head. I couldn't do it anymore. Couldn't get back in a vehicle without having panic attacks. Couldn't sleep without dreaming about the explosion, about the guys I couldn't save. The army shrink said I had PTSD, that I needed treatment. Instead, I took the medical discharge and came home. I'm sorry, Ava said quietly. That must have been terrible. It was. Still is, sometimes. But I got Eli through it, and that's what mattered. Luke looked over at his son, who was now building a small fort with sticks and rocks. His mom couldn't handle it, the nightmares, the anger, the drinking I did for a while to cope. She left when Eli was 5. Took me another year to get my head straight, to stop feeling sorry for myself and start being a father. And you came to the mountains. Seemed like a good place to disappear, start over. He laughed bitterly. A lot of good that did. You didn't disappear, Ava said. You just found peace for a little while. There's nothing wrong with that. Luke wanted to believe her, but peace felt like a luxury he could no longer afford. Not after everything that had happened in the last 3 days. As the sun dipped lower, painting the sky in shades of orange and red, Luke made the decision that they needed to move. They had 2 hours until the meeting with Marcus, and he wanted to scope out the motel first, make sure it was safe before walking into what could be a trap. They piled back into the stolen sedan and Luke drove carefully, taking back roads and avoiding main highways. The Ponderosa Motel appeared just after 7:30, a rundown collection of single-story units arranged in a U-shape around a gravel parking lot. A flickering neon sign advertised vacancy, and the whole place had the tired, forgotten look of somewhere that had seen better days decades ago. Luke drove past without stopping, circling the block twice to check for any suspicious vehicles. He saw nothing that set off alarm bells, but that didn't mean they were safe. These men were professionals. They knew how to blend in. Stay in the car, Luke told Ava and Eli. I'm going to check it out. Luke, just stay in the car. If anything happens, if you see those SUVs or anyone who looks wrong, you drive. Don't wait for me. Just go. Before Ava could argue, Luke was out of the car and moving toward the motel office. The clerk behind the desk was an older woman with tired eyes and gray hair pulled back in a ponytail. She barely looked up when Luke entered. Help you? I'm looking for room 14, reservation under Collins. The woman shuffled through some papers and nodded. Yep, your friend checked in about an hour ago. Paid cash, said you'd be along. She slid a key across the counter. Checkout's at 11. Luke took the key, his hand trembling slightly. This was it. Either Marcus had come through and was waiting with help, or they were walking into something much worse. He returned to the car and drove to the far end of the parking lot, backing into a space near room 14. The room's curtains were drawn, but Luke could see light filtering through the cracks. Wait here, he told Ava and Eli again. If I'm not back in 5 minutes? I know. Drive away. Ava's hand found his arm. Be careful. Luke nodded and approached the door, his heart pounding. He knocked twice, paused, then knocked once more. an old signal he and Marcus had used back in their army days. The door opened immediately, and Marcus stood there exactly as Luke remembered him, tall, broad-shouldered, with dark skin and eyes that missed nothing. He'd aged well, his hair showing just a touch of gray at the temples, and he wore civilian clothes, jeans, and a dark jacket, but he still carried himself like a soldier. "Luke!" Marcus pulled him into a brief, hard embrace. "Damn, it's good to see you, even under these circumstances." "You too, man." Luke glanced past him into the room. "You alone?" "For now. The people I contacted are on their way. Should be here within the hour." Marcus's expression turned serious. "You want to tell me what the hell is going on? You sounded spooked on the phone." Luke quickly filled him in, finding Ava, the men at his cabin, the chase at the mall, everything. Marcus listened without interrupting, his expression growing darker with each detail. "Jesus Christ, Luke," Marcus said when he finished. "You're telling me you've got Ava Sinclair in your car right now? The Ava Sinclair who supposedly died 3 days ago? You heard about that? It was all over the news. Single car accident, alcohol in her system, tragic loss of a brilliant businesswoman. They had her executives crying on camera and everything." Marcus shook his head. "If what you're saying is true, this is way bigger than corporate espionage. This is conspiracy to commit murder, fraud, probably treason if they were really selling defense tech to foreign governments. She has evidence. Everything on a thumb drive. But she needs protection first, witness protection or something. Can your contacts help with that?" "Maybe, but we need to be smart about this. If her board has the kind of reach you're describing, they could have people in law enforcement, in federal agencies. We can't just walk her into the nearest FBI office." "So what do we do?" Marcus thought for a moment. "There's a guy I know used to work for the Justice Department. He's retired now but still has connections. If anyone can navigate this without alerting the wrong people, it's him. But he's going to want to verify her identity first, make sure this isn't some kind of con." "It's not a con. You'll see when you meet her." "Then bring her in. Let's get this sorted." Luke returned to the car and helped Ava out. She moved slowly, still in pain, and Eli stayed close to his father's side as they crossed the parking lot. When they entered the motel room, Marcus's eyes widened slightly. "Holy hell," he breathed. "It really is you." Ava straightened despite her obvious exhaustion. "And you are?" "Marcus Reed, army buddy of Luke's. I'm here to help." He gestured to the small table where a laptop sat open. "But first I need to verify your identity. No offense, but I need to be sure." "Of course." Ava pulled out the thumb drive and handed it to him. "This should have everything you need. My fingerprints are on file with the SEC, and my DNA was part of a genome project I funded last year. Any federal database should be able to confirm who I am." Marcus took the drive and plugged it into his laptop. His fingers flew across the keyboard, and Luke watched as his friend's expression shifted from skepticism to shock to grim determination. This is everything," Marcus said. "Financial records, emails, recorded phone calls. You've got evidence of bribery, fraud, conspiracy. If even half of this holds up in court, you're going to destroy some very powerful people." "Well, that's the idea," Ava said quietly. "Can you get it to someone who'll actually do something with it?" "I can try. But first, we need to keep you alive long enough to testify." Marcus closed the laptop and looked at Luke. "Those men who chased you, did you get a good look at any of them?" "Not really. They moved like military, though. Private contractors, probably." "That's what I figured. Sinclair Dynamics probably hired a security firm, paid them under the table to clean up their mess." Marcus rubbed his jaw. "The good news is, if they're private contractors, they're not cops. They can't just kick down doors and arrest you. The bad news is, they don't have to follow any rules either." "So what's the plan?" Luke asked. Before Marcus could answer, headlights swept across the motel room's window. Everyone froze. Luke moved to the curtain and peered out, his blood running cold. 2 black SUVs had just pulled into the parking lot. "We've got company," Luke said, his voice tight, quick and efficient, then helped Ava through. Luke lifted Eli up and passed him to Marcus, then squeezed through himself, scraping his shoulders on the narrow frame. They emerged into an alley behind the motel, darkness closing in around them. Luke could hear car doors slamming, footsteps approaching the room they'd just fled. "This way," Marcus whispered, leading them down the alley toward a side street where his truck was parked. They moved as quickly and quietly as they could, Ava limping beside Luke, Eli clutched in Marcus's arms. They were 10 feet from the truck when a figure stepped out from behind a dumpster, blocking their path. The man raised a gun, his face cold and professional in the dim light. "That's far enough," he said. Luke's mind raced. They were trapped. The alley was narrow, no room to run. Behind them, he could hear more footsteps, the other men closing in. But Marcus didn't hesitate. He set Eli down and launched himself at the gunman in one fluid motion, years of combat training making his movements almost too fast to follow. The two men crashed to the ground, grappling for the weapon. "Run!" Marcus shouted. "Get to the truck!" Luke grabbed Eli with one hand and Ava with the other, pulling them past the fighting men. The gun went off, the sound deafening in the enclosed space, and Luke's heart stopped. But Marcus rolled away, apparently unhurt, and the gunman lay still on the ground. They reached Marcus's truck, and Luke yanked open the door, shoving Eli and Ava inside. Marcus was right behind them, breathing hard, blood on his knuckles. "Drive," he said, tossing Luke the keys. Luke didn't need to be told twice. He started the engine and floored it, tires squealing as they shot out of the side street. In the rear-view mirror, he saw the other men emerging from the alley, but they were already too far away. For now. "How did they find us?" Ava asked, her voice shaking. "How do they keep finding us?" "I don't know," Marcus said grimly. "But we need to figure it out fast, or they're going to keep coming." Luke drove without direction, just putting distance between them and the motel. His hands were white-knuckled on the steering wheel, and he could feel Eli trembling in the back seat. This was getting worse. Every time they thought they'd found safety, those men appeared like ghosts. "The thumb drive," Marcus said suddenly. "Let me see it again." Ava pulled it from her pocket and handed it over. Marcus examined it carefully, his expression darkening. "There," he said, pointing to a small metallic strip barely visible along the drive's edge. "GPS tracker. Microscopic, embedded in the casing. That's how they've been following you." Luke felt sick. The one thing they'd thought would save them had been leading their hunters right to them the whole time. "Destroy it," Ava said immediately. "Wait." Marcus held up a hand. "If we destroy it without thinking this through, we lose our leverage. But if we're smart..." He trailed off, thinking. Then he smiled. "We can use this against them." "How?" Luke asked. "By making them think they've won." Marcus's smile widened. "We split up. I take the thumb drive and lead them on a chase while you get Ava somewhere safe. They'll follow me, thinking they're following her. By the time they realize their mistake, we'll have had time to upload the files to a secure location and get her into protective custody." Luke didn't like the idea of splitting up, but he couldn't argue with the logic. "Where do we take her?" "There's a safe house about 2 hours from here. Used to be an FBI safe house, abandoned now, but still secure. I'll give you the address. Get there, lay low, and wait for my call." "And if you don't call?" Marcus met his eyes. "Then you do whatever it takes to keep her alive and get that evidence to the right people, no matter what." They pulled into a gas station and Marcus quickly wrote down an address on a piece of paper. He also transferred the files from the thumb drive to a secure cloud server using his phone's encrypted connection, making sure they had a backup even if the drive was destroyed. "Done," he said, handing the drive back to Ava. "Now we split. Luke, take my truck. I'll take your stolen car. Figure they've probably got the plates by now anyway." They made the switch in the gas station parking lot, and Luke watched as Marcus drove away in the sedan, the thumb drive with its tracker presumably in his pocket. It felt wrong, letting his friend draw the danger away, but Luke knew there was no other choice. He climbed into Marcus's truck with Ava and Eli and pulled out the piece of paper with the address. 2 hours. They just had to survive 2 more hours. The drive was tense and silent. Luke kept checking the rear-view mirror, expecting to see headlights following them, but the road stayed dark and empty. Ava sat with her head against the window, exhausted beyond words, and Eli had finally fallen asleep in the back seat, emotionally drained from the constant terror. They reached the safe house just after midnight. It was a small cabin hidden deep in the woods, so remote that Luke almost missed the turnoff. The place looked abandoned, with boarded-up windows and an overgrown yard, but when Luke tried the door, it opened with a key Marcus had taped under the address paper. Inside the cabin was sparse but functional. dusty furniture, a wood stove, and a couple of beds with bare mattresses. It wasn't much, but it was shelter. Luke carried Eli to one of the beds and laid him down gently, covering him with a blanket from the truck. The boy didn't even stir. Then he turned to Ava, who was standing in the middle of the main room, looking lost. "You should rest," Luke said quietly. "I don't think I can." She wrapped her arms around herself. "Every time I close my eyes, I see them. Those men. I keep thinking about what would have happened if Marcus hadn't been there, if you hadn't gotten us out." Luke moved closer, stopping just in front of her. "But we did get out. You're safe now." "Am I?" Ava's voice cracked. "Are any of us? They keep finding us, Luke. They keep coming. What if they find us here too? What if they hurt you or Eli because of me?" "Hey!" Luke reached out and gently tilted her chin up so she was looking at him. "That's not going to happen. We're going to get through this. Marcus is going to lead them away. We're going to wait here until we hear from him, and then we're going to end this. You're going to testify. Those bastards are going to prison, and you're going to get your life back." "And what about you?" Ava asked, her eyes searching his face. "What about your life? What about Eli's life? You've given up everything to help me, and I don't know if I can ever repay that." "I'm not asking you to repay anything." "I know. That's what makes it worse." Tears spilled down her cheeks. "You're a good man, Luke Bennett, better than anyone I've ever known, and I've brought nothing but danger to your door." Luke felt something shift in his chest, some wall he'd built around himself after his ex-wife left starting to crumble. He saw Ava clearly now, not as the powerful CEO, not as the woman who'd disrupted his quiet life, but as someone who was scared and alone and trying desperately to do the right thing despite impossible odds. "You didn't bring danger," he said softly. "You survived, and that took more strength than most people have." Ava let out a shaky breath, and then before Luke could process what was happening, she closed the distance between them and pressed her forehead against his chest. He hesitated only a moment before wrapping his arms around her, holding her as she finally allowed herself to break down. They stood like that for a long time, and Luke realized with startling clarity that somewhere between carrying her out of those woods and fighting to keep her alive, he'd started to care about Ava Sinclair as more than just someone he'd rescued. She'd become important to him in a way he hadn't expected and wasn't sure he was ready for. Eventually, Ava pulled back, wiping her eyes. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to fall apart on you. Don't apologize. You've been through hell." She managed a weak smile. "We both have." Luke guided her to the second bed and made sure she was settled before returning to the main room. He found an old chair by the window and sat down, keeping watch the way he'd done every night since finding her. Outside, the forest was dark and silent, and somewhere out there, Marcus was leading their pursuers on a wild chase. Luke checked his watch. 12:30 in the morning. Marcus had said he'd call once he'd led the hunters far enough away. Until then, all they could do was wait. The hours crawled by. 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock. Luke's eyes burned with exhaustion, but he didn't dare sleep. At 3 in the morning, he heard Ava stirring and turned to see her sitting up in bed. "Can't sleep?" he asked quietly. "Too much adrenaline." She stood and walked over to where he sat. "Can I ask you something?" "Sure." "What are you going to do when this is over? When it's safe and you can go back to your life?" Luke thought about his cabin, about the quiet mornings watching the sun rise over the mountains, about teaching Eli to fish in the creek. That life felt like something from another world now, something that belonged to a different version of himself. "I don't know," he admitted. "I guess I haven't thought that far ahead. I've been too focused on just surviving." "When this is over," Ava said slowly, "I'm going to rebuild Sinclair Dynamics. Take it back from the people who tried to destroy it, and me. But I'm going to do it differently this time. No more trusting the wrong people. No more compromising my values for profit." "Sounds like a good plan." "I'm also going to make sure you and Eli are taken care of. The company owes you a debt I can never fully repay, but I can at least make sure you never have to worry about money again." Luke shook his head. "I don't want your money, Ava." "Then what do you want?" It was a simple question, but Luke didn't have a simple answer. What did he want? Peace, security, a life where he didn't have to constantly look over his shoulder? Or maybe something more? Something he'd seen in Ava's eyes when she looked at him. something that scared and excited him in equal measure. Before he could answer, his phone, Marcus's phone, which he'd been using, buzzed with a text message. Luke's heart jumped as he read it. Led them to the coast. They took the bait. You're clear for now. Getting evidence to my contact at DOJ. Stay put until you hear from me. Stay safe, brother. Luke let out a breath he'd been holding for hours. Marcus had done it. They were safe, at least for now. He showed the message to Ava, and the relief on her face was palpable. It's working. It's actually working. Yeah, Luke said, allowing himself to feel a glimmer of hope. Maybe we're going to make it through this after all. Ava reached out and took his hand, squeezing gently. Thank you for everything. Luke squeezed back, and in that moment, sitting in a dusty safe house in the middle of nowhere with dawn still hours away, he felt something he hadn't felt in years. He felt like maybe, just maybe, things were going to be okay. Dawn broke cold and gray over the safe house, filtering through gaps in the boarded windows and painting thin lines of pale light across the dusty floor. Luke hadn't slept at all, his body running on nothing but adrenaline and coffee he'd found in Marcus's truck, stale and bitter, but necessary. Ava had dozed off around 4 in the morning, her breathing finally evening out into something close to peaceful, and Eli remained curled up on the other bed, one small hand tucked beneath his cheek. Luke stood by the window, watching the forest come alive with morning sounds, birds calling, branches creaking in the wind, the distant rustle of some animal moving through the underbrush. It all seemed so normal, so removed from the nightmare they'd been living. But he knew better than to trust the quiet. The quiet was when danger liked to strike. His phone buzzed again, making him jump. Another message from Marcus. Contact received the files. Authentic and damning. They're moving fast. Federal prosecutor wants to meet with Ava today. Can you get to Portland by noon? Luke stared at the message, his heart pounding. This was it. This was what they'd been fighting for, bleeding for, running for, a chance to end it. He texted back quickly. Where? The response came almost immediately. Federal Courthouse, downtown Portland, side entrance on 3rd Avenue. My contact will meet you there. His name is Robert Chen. Former Justice Department, now works as a consultant on cases like this. You can trust him. Luke typed out one more question. What about the men hunting us? Marcus's reply took longer this time. Still chasing ghosts on the coast. But they'll figure it out eventually. You need to move fast. Get her to Chen, get her statement on record, and get federal protection in place before they regroup. Clock's ticking. Luke pocketed the phone and turned to find Ava awake, watching him from the bed. Her hair was tangled, her face still pale, but there was a new determination in her eyes. That was Marcus? She asked. Yeah, he got the files to his contact. They want to meet with you today. Portland, noon. Ava sat up slowly, pressing a hand to her bandaged ribs. Then we should go. Are you sure you're up for this? You're still hurt, still healing. I don't have a choice. She stood, swaying slightly before catching her balance. If I don't do this now, while we have the chance, we might not get another opportunity. They'll regroup, they'll figure out Marcus's trick, and they'll come at us even harder. Luke knew she was right, but that didn't make it easier to accept. He'd seen what the stress and physical toll had done to her over the past few days. She was running on fumes, held together by little more than willpower and bandages. All right, he said finally. But we do this smart. We take back roads, we stay alert, and at the first sign of trouble, we abort and find another way. Agreed. Eli stirred then, blinking awake and sitting up with confusion written across his young face. Dad? Where are we? Safe house, buddy. We're safe. Luke moved to his son's side and ruffled his hair. But we need to get moving again. How are you feeling? Tired, Eli yawned. And hungry? I know. We'll get you some food soon, I promise. Luke helped the boy up and made sure he had his shoes on. They had to travel light, move fast, and pray that luck was finally on their side. They left the safe house just after 7 in the morning, piling into Marcus's truck with Luke behind the wheel. The drive to Portland would take roughly 2.5 hours if they took the highway, longer if they stuck to back roads. Luke chose back roads, winding through small towns and farmland, places where black SUVs would stand out like sore thumbs. Ava sat in the passenger seat, quiet and withdrawn, staring out at the passing landscape. Luke could see the wheels turning in her mind, probably rehearsing what she'd say to the prosecutor, running through the evidence, preparing for the fight of her life. "What happens after you testify?" Luke asked, breaking the silence. Ava glanced at him. "Assuming they believe me and move forward with prosecution, I'll be placed in protective custody until the trial. Could be weeks, could be months. The board members will be arrested, assets frozen. The company will be in chaos. And then? And then I rebuild. Or I walk away and let someone else rebuild." She sighed. "Honestly, I don't know anymore. Part of me wants to fight for what I created, but another part just wants to be done with all of it. Start fresh somewhere new." Luke understood that feeling more than she knew. The desire to walk away from everything, to shed your old life like a snake shedding its skin and become someone new. He'd tried it once before, retreating to the mountains with Eli, but life had a way of finding you no matter how far you ran. "You'll figure it out," he said. "You're smart enough to know what you want when the dust settles." "I hope so." Ava was quiet for a moment, then added softly, "I know what I don't want." "What's that?" "To go back to being alone, to surrounding myself with people who only care about money and power." She looked at him. "These last few days, as terrible as they've been, they've also shown me what really matters. People who help because it's right, not because there's profit in it. People like you and Eli." Luke felt his throat tighten. "We're just doing what anyone would do." "No. Most people would have walked away. Most people would have called the police and let it be someone else's problem." She reached over and placed her hand on his arm. "You risked everything for a stranger. That's not something I'll ever forget." Before Luke could respond, Eli piped up from the back seat. "Miss Sinclair, are the bad men going to jail?" Ava turned to look at the boy. "I'm going to make sure they do, sweetheart. They're going to pay for what they did." "Good," Eli said firmly, "because they scared my dad, and they hurt you, and that's not okay." Luke's chest swelled with pride at his son's words. The kid had been through hell these past few days, had seen things no 8-year-old should see. But he was still kind, still cared about right and wrong. Whatever mistakes Luke had made as a father, he'd done something right to raise a boy like that. They stopped at a small diner outside Salem around 9:30, partly because Eli was starving and partly because they needed to fuel up before the final push to Portland. Luke chose a booth in the back corner where he could watch the door, and they ordered quickly, pancakes and eggs for Eli, coffee and toast for Ava, a full breakfast for Luke even though his stomach was in knots. The diner was nearly empty, just a handful of truckers and early morning travelers. Luke watched them carefully, looking for anyone who seemed out of place, anyone paying too much attention to their table. But everyone seemed absorbed in their own worlds, and gradually he allowed himself to relax a fraction. "Dad," Eli said around a mouthful of pancakes, "when this is over, can we go home?" The question hit Luke harder than he expected. Home. Their cabin in the woods, the place they'd built their quiet life. But was it still home? Would it ever feel safe again after those men had shown up, after they'd been forced to flee in the night? "I don't know, buddy," Luke said honestly. "Maybe. Or maybe we find a new home somewhere else. But I like our cabin. I like the creek and the woods and the raccoons." "I know you do. We'll figure it out, okay? First, we have to make sure Miss Sinclair is safe. Then we'll worry about where we're going to live." Eli nodded, accepting this, and returned to his pancakes. Ava caught Luke's eye across the table and gave him a small, sad smile. She understood what he wasn't saying, that his home, his sanctuary, had been compromised because of her, that he and Eli might never be able to go back. They finished eating and got back on the road, and by 11 o'clock they were entering the outskirts of Portland. The city rose up around them, all glass and steel and concrete, a far cry from the mountains and forests they'd been hiding in. Luke felt exposed here, vulnerable, too many people, too many places for danger to hide. He navigated downtown carefully, following the GPS on Marcus's phone to the federal courthouse. It was an imposing building, all marble columns and heavy doors, the kind of place that was supposed to represent justice and order. Luke hoped it lived up to that promise. He parked a block away, not wanting to pull right up to the courthouse in case they were being watched. They walked the remaining distance, Luke keeping Eli close and scanning their surroundings constantly. Ava moved stiffly beside him, each step clearly causing her pain, but she didn't complain. The side entrance on 3rd Avenue was less grand than the main entrance, just a plain door with a security panel. Luke pressed the buzzer and waited, his heart hammering in his chest. A voice crackled through the intercom. "Can I help you?" "We're here to see Robert Chen," Luke said. "Marcus Reed sent us." There was a pause, then the door clicked open. "3rd floor, room 312. They entered a narrow hallway with fluorescent lights and linoleum floors, very different from the courthouse's grand public spaces. An elevator took them to the 3rd floor, and Luke found room 312 at the end of another bland hallway. He knocked, and the door opened immediately. The man standing there was in his 50s, Asian American, with graying hair and sharp, intelligent eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. He wore a suit, but no tie, and his expression was both cautious and curious. "Luke Bennett?" he asked. "That's me. This is Ava Sinclair, and this is my son Eli." Robert Chen's eyes widened when he looked at Ava, recognition and shock flashing across his face. "My God, Marcus said it was really you, but I had to see it to believe it." He stepped back, opening the door wider. "Please, come in, quickly." They entered a small conference room with a table, several chairs, and not much else. Chen closed the door behind them and locked it, then turned to Ava with an expression of profound respect. "Miss Sinclair, I've followed your career for years. Your work in aerospace technology has been groundbreaking. When I heard about your death, He stopped himself. "I'm sorry. That must sound strange. But the point is, I'm glad you're alive, and I'm here to help." "Thank you," Ava said, her voice steady despite her obvious exhaustion. "Marcus said you could be trusted." "You can," Chen gestured to the chairs. "Please sit. We have a lot to discuss and not much time." They all sat, and Chen pulled out a laptop and a legal pad. "First, I need to verify your identity beyond any doubt. The files Marcus sent me are compelling, but I need to be absolutely certain before we move forward. Can you provide me with personal information that only the real Ava Sinclair would know?" For the next 20 minutes, Ava answered question after question, details about her childhood, her education, her company's founding, specific projects she'd worked on, even the names of her childhood pets. Chen cross-referenced everything on his laptop, nodding along, and finally he sat back with satisfaction. "It's really you," he said, "which means everything in those files is legitimate." His expression turned grim. "Miss Sinclair, what your board tried to do to you is one of the most egregious cases of corporate corruption I've seen in my career, and I've seen a lot." "Can you prosecute them?" Ava asked. "Oh, we can do more than prosecute. We can destroy them." Chen opened a folder and spread out several documents. "Based on the evidence you've provided, we have grounds to charge 12 members of your board with conspiracy to commit murder, fraud, attempted sale of classified defense technology to foreign entities, obstruction of justice, and about a dozen other crimes. We're talking decades in prison for everyone involved." Relief flooded Ava's face, so intense that tears sprang to her eyes. "Thank God." "But," Chen continued, his tone cautioning, "we need to move fast. Once we start making arrests, your enemies will know you're alive, and they'll come after you with everything they have. I've already arranged for federal marshals to take you into protective custody as soon as we're done here. You'll be moved to a secure location, and you'll stay there until we have everyone in custody and the trial is set." "How long will that take?" "Hard to say. Weeks, minimum. Possibly a few months. These cases are complicated, and the defense attorneys will fight every step of the way." Chen looked at Luke and Eli. "As for you two, you're witnesses to attempted kidnapping and assault. You'll need to give statements, and you'll also need protection until this is resolved." Luke's stomach dropped. "What kind of protection?" "Ideally, you'd enter witness protection as well. New identities, relocation, the works. It's the safest option." "No." Luke's response was immediate and firm. "I'm not putting my son through that. He's already been through enough. Mr. Bennett, I understand your reluctance, but these people have already proven they're willing to kill. If they think you're a threat, then we'll deal with it. But I'm not uprooting Eli's entire life, taking away his name, his identity, everything he knows. We'll take protection, security, whatever you want to provide, but we're not disappearing. Chen looked like he wanted to argue, but something in Luke's expression must have convinced him it was pointless. All right, we'll arrange for private security then. Former FBI, top tier. They'll keep you safe until the trials are over. Eli, who had been sitting quietly through all of this, suddenly spoke up. Can we still go home? To our cabin? Chen and Luke exchanged a glance, and Chen's expression softened. I'm afraid that's not advisable right now, son. But once this is all over, once the bad people are in jail, you'll be able to go wherever you want. That's a promise? Eli pressed. That's a promise. Chen turned back to his laptop and began typing rapidly. I'm initiating the arrest warrants now. We'll have teams moving on your board members within the hour. Miss Sinclair, I need you to write out a detailed statement of everything that happened. The meetings about the sale, who was involved, when you became suspicious, the accident, everything. The marshals will be here in 30 minutes to take you to the safe house. Ava nodded and accepted the pen and paper Chen offered. Her hand shook slightly as she began to write, years of fear and betrayal pouring out onto the page. Luke stood and moved to the window, looking out over the city. Somewhere out there, the men who'd been hunting them were still searching, still dangerous. But for the first time in days, Luke felt like they might actually have a chance. The machinery of justice was finally moving, grinding slowly but inevitably toward the people who tried to destroy Ava. Dad? Eli appeared at his side, tugging on his sleeve. Is it really almost over? Luke knelt down to his son's level and pulled him into a hug. Yeah, buddy. I think it might be. Good. I'm tired of running. Me too. They stayed like that for a moment, father and son, finding comfort in each other's presence. When Luke finally stood, he found Ava watching them with an expression he couldn't quite read. Longing, maybe, or regret for the family she'd never had time to build because she'd been so focused on her career. Chen's phone rang, and he answered it quickly. Yes? Good. Send them up. He hung up and looked at Ava. The marshals are here. Are you finished with your statement? Ava signed the bottom of the page and handed it over. It's done. There was a knock at the door, and Chen opened it to reveal 2 U.S. Marshals, a man and a woman, both in their 40s, both with the kind of hard, competent look that came from years of protecting witnesses. They introduced themselves as Marshals Davidson and Torres. Miss Sinclair, Davidson said, his voice professional but kind. We're here to take you somewhere safe. We need to leave now. Ava stood, and for a moment she just looked at Luke, her eyes full of things she couldn't say. Then she crossed the room and took his hand. Thank you, she said quietly, for what felt like the 100th time. For saving my life, for protecting me, for believing me when you had no reason to. You don't have to thank me, Luke said, his voice rough. Yes, I do. She squeezed his hand tighter. I wish we'd met under different circumstances. I wish I could have gotten to know you and Eli without all of this chaos and danger. Maybe when it's over, you still can. Something flickered in Ava's eyes. Hope, possibility. But before she could respond, Marshal Torres cleared her throat. Ma'am, we really need to go. Ava nodded and released Luke's hand. She crouched down in front of Eli and smiled. You take care of your dad, okay? He's one of the good ones. I know, Eli said seriously. Are you going to be okay? I am now. Thanks to you two. She stood and looked at Luke one more time. I'll see you at the trial? I'll be there. Then the marshals were leading her away, and Luke watched her disappear down the hallway, feeling like something important had just walked out of his life. Chen was talking to him about security arrangements and safe houses, but Luke barely heard him. His mind was still on Ava, on the way she'd looked at him, on the possibilities that had opened up between them despite the impossible circumstances. Mr. Bennett? Chen's voice cut through his thoughts. Are you listening? Sorry, what were you saying? I was saying that I've arranged for you and your son to stay at a hotel downtown while we work on getting you a security detail. It's not ideal, but it's the best I can do on short notice. You'll check in under false names, and there will be plainclothes officers in the lobby and on your floor. How long do we have to stay there? Until we've made all the arrests and we're confident there's no immediate threat. A few days, most likely. Maybe a week. Luke nodded, though the thought of being cooped up in a hotel room for a week made his skin crawl. But it was better than being dead. Chen handed him a folder with hotel information, contact numbers, and instructions. One more thing. The news is going to break within hours that Ava Sinclair is alive. Once that happens, the media is going to go insane trying to find her, trying to find you. Don't talk to reporters. Don't post anything on social media. Don't do anything that might reveal your location. I don't have social media, Luke said. Good. Keep it that way. Chen stood and offered his hand. You did a brave thing, Mr. Bennett. Most people wouldn't have gotten involved, wouldn't have risked themselves for a stranger. Because of you, we're going to take down some very bad people and prevent classified technology from falling into enemy hands. The country owes you a debt. Luke shook his hand but didn't feel like a hero. He felt tired and worried and uncertain about what came next. I just want my son to be safe. He will be. I promise you that. Luke and Eli left the courthouse and walked back to Marcus's truck in the pale afternoon sunlight. The city bustled around them, people going about their ordinary lives with no idea that something monumental had just happened. Luke envied them that normalcy, that ability to worry about ordinary things like work and bills and what to make for dinner. They drove to the hotel Chen had arranged, a mid-range place in a busy part of downtown. Luke checked in under the name Collins, the same fake name Marcus had used at the Ponderosa Motel, and they took the elevator to the 7th floor. The room was standard and anonymous. 2 double beds, a small TV, a bathroom with industrial soap. It felt wrong after days of running, like they should still be moving, still be watching over their shoulders. But for now, they were safe. Eli immediately flopped onto one of the beds and turned on the TV, flipping through channels until he found cartoons. Luke sat on the other bed and pulled out Marcus's phone, checking for messages. There was one from Marcus himself, sent an hour ago, heard from Chen. You made it. Good work. I'm still on the coast, but heading back your way. Should be there by tomorrow. Keep your head down. Luke texted back a quick thanks, then set the phone aside and lay back on the bed, staring at the ceiling. His body ached from days of stress and little sleep. His mind was racing with everything that had happened, and his heart felt strangely empty now that Ava was gone. He'd known her for less than a week, had spent most of that time either patching up her wounds or running for their lives, but somehow in those brief, intense days, she'd become important to him. He'd seen her strength, her determination, her vulnerability. He'd held her when she cried and fought beside her when she was in danger, and now she was gone, tucked away in some federal safe house where he couldn't reach her, couldn't protect her. Dad? Eli's voice broke through his thoughts. Are you okay? Luke turned his head to look at his son. Yeah, buddy, just tired. Do you think we'll see Miss Sinclair again? I don't know, maybe. I hope so. I liked her. Luke smiled despite everything. Yeah, I liked her too. They ordered room service for dinner, burgers and fries for Eli, a sandwich for Luke that he barely touched. As night fell over Portland, Luke stood by the window and watched the city lights come on one by one, thinking about everything they'd been through, everything they'd survived. Around 8 o'clock, Chen called with an update. We've arrested 6 board members so far. The others are being picked up as we speak. It's all over the news. Ava Sinclair alive, massive corporate conspiracy exposed. The media is going crazy. What about the men who were hunting us? We've identified them as employees of a private security firm called Blackstone Solutions. Federal agents raided their offices 2 hours ago and arrested the company's CEO along with the team that was assigned to your case. They're being charged as accessories to attempted murder. Relief flooded through Luke. So it's really over. The immediate danger is over, yes, but the legal process is just beginning. We'll need your testimony, probably multiple times. And there's still a chance someone connected to the board might try something desperate before we get them all behind bars. That's why we have protection. Exactly. But Mr. Bennett, I want you to understand something. What you did, what you risked, it matters. Ava Sinclair is alive because of you. Justice is being served because of you. That's not nothing. After Chen hung up, Luke turned on the TV and found a news channel. Sure enough, Ava's story was dominating the coverage. Her photo, a professional headshot from before the accident,
filled the screen while an anchor breathlessly reported on her miraculous survival and the shocking revelations about her company's board. In a stunning development, Ava Sinclair, the CEO of Sinclair Dynamics, who was reported dead 5 days ago, has been revealed to be alive and in federal protective custody. Sources say Sinclair uncovered a plot by her own board members to sell classified defense technology to foreign buyers, and that the board attempted to have her killed when she refused to cooperate. Federal agents have made multiple arrests, and more are expected in the coming days. This story is still developing, and we'll bring you updates as we have them. Luke watched for a few minutes, then turned it off. He didn't need to see it play out on TV. He'd lived it, breathed it, nearly died for it. Eli had fallen asleep again, exhausted by the emotional toll of the day. Luke pulled a blanket over his son and then lay down on his own bed, finally allowing himself to close his eyes. For the first time in days, he slept without nightmares. He woke to his phone buzzing on the nightstand. Disoriented, he grabbed it and saw it was just after midnight. The message was from an unknown number. "Luke, it's Ava. They gave me a secured phone. I just wanted to make sure you and Eli made it to the hotel safely. Chen told me about the arrests. I can barely believe it's really happening." Luke sat up, his heart suddenly pounding. He typed back quickly. "We're safe. Saw the news. You're famous all over again." Her response came almost immediately. "Famous for almost getting killed. Not exactly how I wanted to make headlines. But at least the truth is out. How's Eli?" "Sleeping. He's okay. Scared, but okay. He asked about you earlier." There was a longer pause before her next message appeared. "Tell him I asked about him too. And Luke, I know this is complicated, but when all of this is over, when the trials are done and I have my life back, I'd like to see you again. Both of you, if you're willing." Luke stared at the message, his chest tight. He thought about what that would mean, letting someone new into their lives, taking a risk on connection after spending so long keeping the world at arm's length. It scared him, but it also felt right in a way nothing had felt right in years. He typed back slowly. "I'd like that too. Take care of yourself, Ava. You too. And Luke, thank you for everything. I mean it. I know. Get some rest." He set the phone down and lay back in the darkness, a small smile on his face. The road ahead was still uncertain, still full of challenges and unknowns. But for the first time since he'd heard that cry in the woods, Luke felt something he'd almost forgotten how to feel. He felt hope. The hotel room became their world for the next 6 days. Luke watched the news obsessively, following each new development in what the media had dubbed the Sinclair scandal. More arrests were made. 14 board members in total, along with executives from Blackstone Solutions and several foreign intermediaries who had been facilitating the illegal sale. The story dominated every news cycle, with talking heads dissecting corporate corruption and questioning how such a conspiracy could have gone undetected for so long. Ava's face was everywhere. Journalists dug up old interviews, analyzed her career trajectory, debated whether she'd been naive or heroic for refusing to cooperate with her board. Some painted her as a victim, others as a crusader. Luke thought both descriptions missed the mark. She was simply a woman who'd refused to compromise her principles, even when it nearly cost her everything. Marcus showed up on the 3rd day, looking tired but satisfied. He brought groceries, clean clothes, and news that the federal prosecutors were building an airtight case. The evidence Ava had compiled was even more damaging than they'd initially thought. Emails discussing not just the sale, but also plans to eliminate her if she continued to be a problem. Financial records showing payments to Blackstone Solutions for what was euphemistically termed security consultation, and recordings of board meetings where members openly discussed treason as if it were just another line item on a quarterly report. "They're going to throw everything they've got at these people," Marcus said, sitting on the edge of Luke's bed while Eli played with a handheld game Marcus had brought him. "Multiple federal agencies are involved now: FBI, SEC, Department of Defense. This is bigger than corporate fraud. This is a matter of national security." "And Ava?" Luke asked. "How's she holding up?" Marcus gave him a knowing look. "She's fine. Frustrated about being cooped up, worried about her company, but fine. She asks about you every time Chen calls with an update." Luke felt heat creep up his neck. "It's not like that." "Sure it's not.
Marcus grinned. Luke, I've known you for 15 years. I've never seen you look at anyone the way you looked at her in that motel room. And I saw how she looked at you, too. There's something there. There's gratitude, trauma bonding, that's all. If you say so. Marcus didn't push it further, but his smile suggested he knew better. Anyway, Chen wants you to come in tomorrow for a formal deposition. They need your testimony on record, what you saw at your cabin, the chase at the mall, everything. It'll take a few hours, but it's necessary for building the case. The next morning, Luke and Eli were driven to the federal building in an unmarked car with two plainclothes marshals. The deposition was held in a secure conference room with Chen, two assistant prosecutors, and a court reporter. For 3 hours, Luke recounted everything that had happened, from the moment he'd heard Ava's cry in the woods to the moment he'd handed her over to the marshals. The prosecutors asked detailed questions, had him clarify timelines, identify people from photographs of the Blackstone team. It was exhausting, reliving all of it, but Luke forced himself to be precise and thorough. These people needed his testimony to put monsters behind bars. He owed them that much. He owed Ava that much. When it was finally over, Chen walked him out to the waiting area where Eli sat reading a comic book under the watchful eye of a marshal. You did good in there, Chen said. Your testimony is solid. It's going to help tremendously. When's the trial? Not for a while. These things move slowly. We're looking at probably 6 to 8 months before we're in front of a jury. Chen paused, then added, Miss Sinclair will be testifying next week. Her deposition alone is going to take days, given everything she knows. But after that, assuming there are no complications, she'll be able to leave protective custody. Luke's heart jumped. She'll be free? In a manner of speaking, she'll still need security, and she'll have restrictions on where she can go and who she can see until the trial. But yes, she'll have more freedom than she does now. Chen studied Luke's face. She's asked if it would be possible to see you. Not officially, you understand, just personally. When? That depends on you. If you're willing, I can arrange it. Somewhere neutral, somewhere safe. Next week, maybe. Luke thought about it for all of 2 seconds. Yeah, I'm willing. Chen nodded, a small smile playing at his lips. I thought you might be. I'll set it up. The days that followed were strange. Luke and Eli had been cleared to leave the hotel and move into a temporary apartment Chen had arranged. A 2-bedroom place in a quiet neighborhood with a security detail that rotated shifts in an unmarked car parked outside. It was strange having protection, having people watching over them, but Luke couldn't deny it made him feel safer. Eli started showing signs of returning to normal. The nightmares came less frequently, and he started talking about wanting to go back to school, to see his friends, to do normal kid things. Luke enrolled him in a local elementary school under their real names. Chen had assured him the immediate threat was over, and watched with relief as his son began to heal from the trauma they'd endured. But Luke himself struggled. Without the constant adrenaline of running and surviving, without the immediate need to protect Ava, he felt unmoored. He'd catch himself staring out the window, wondering what she was doing, if she was okay, if she thought about him the way he thought about her. It was ridiculous, he told himself. They barely knew each other. The intensity of what they'd shared was born of extreme circumstances. Nothing more. But then he'd remember the way she'd looked at him in the firelight of his cabin, the way her hand had felt in his, the quiet strength in her voice when she'd promised to bring down the people who'd tried to kill her. And he'd know it wasn't nothing. Chen called on a Friday afternoon, 10 days after Luke's deposition. I've arranged the meeting, tomorrow, 2 o'clock, at a private location. I'll have a car pick you up. Miss Sinclair will have her security detail, you'll have yours, and I'll be there to supervise. It's not romantic, but it's the best I can do. That's fine, Luke said, his pulse already quickening. Thank you. He barely slept that night, and when morning came, he was up early, restless and anxious. Eli noticed his distraction over breakfast. You're nervous about seeing Miss Sinclair, the boy observed with the blunt honesty of children. Luke considered denying it, then decided his son deserved the truth. Yeah, I am. Why? You like her? It's complicated, buddy. Because of Mom. Luke was surprised by the question. He and Eli rarely talked about his ex-wife, who'd remarried and moved to California within a year of the divorce. She sent birthday cards and the occasional phone call, but she'd made it clear she wanted to build a new life without the complications of her old one. No, not because of Mom, Luke said carefully. Because Miss Sinclair and I come from different worlds. She's this successful, brilliant businesswoman, and I'm just me. Eli frowned. You're not just anything, Dad. You're brave and strong, and you saved her life. I think she knows that. Luke pulled his son into a hug, grateful for the perspective only a child could provide. When did you get so smart? I've always been smart. You just don't always notice. At 1:30, a dark sedan pulled up outside their apartment. Luke had agonized over what to wear, finally settling on jeans and a button-down shirt. Not too casual, not trying too hard. He felt like a teenager getting ready for a first date, and the comparison made him both amused and nervous. The drive took 20 minutes, ending at a small park on the outskirts of the city. It was a quiet place with walking trails and a pond where ducks floated lazily. Chen was waiting by a picnic shelter, and as Luke approached with Eli, he saw another car pulling up on the opposite side of the park. Ava stepped out, flanked by two marshals, and even from a distance Luke's breath caught. She was wearing civilian clothes, jeans and a sweater, and her dark hair was loose around her shoulders. The bandages were gone, though he could see she still moved carefully, favoring her injured side. But her face had color again, and her eyes were bright and alert. Their eyes met across the distance, and she smiled. Luke started walking toward her, and she started walking toward him, and they met in the middle of the shelter while their respective security details hung back at a respectful distance. Eli stuck close to his father, suddenly shy. "Hi," Ava said softly. "Hi yourself." Luke couldn't stop looking at her, cataloging all the small changes. "You look better, healthier." "I feel better. Real food, real sleep, actual medical care." She glanced down at Eli, and her smile widened. "Hey there, brave guy. How are you doing?" "I'm okay," Eli said. "School's boring, but Dad says that's normal." Ava laughed, and the sound made Luke's chest ache with something he couldn't quite name. "School is supposed to be a little boring. It means life is getting back to normal." "Can we go feed the ducks?" Eli asked, looking between the two adults. Luke glanced at Chen, who nodded. "Stay where we can see you, buddy." Eli ran off toward the pond with a bag of bread Chen had apparently prepared for exactly this purpose, leaving Luke and Ava alone under the shelter. For a moment, neither of them spoke, the weight of everything they'd been through hanging heavy between them. "I've been following the news," Luke said finally. "Sounds like they've got your board dead to rights." "They do. Chen says it's one of the strongest cases he's ever seen. Between my testimony and the evidence, there's no way they're getting out of this." She paused. "I've also been dealing with the company, had to do it remotely, through lawyers and conference calls, but I've been restructuring the entire board, bringing in people I trust. It's been chaos." "I can imagine." "The irony is that with all the publicity, our stock actually went up. Investors see me as some kind of crusader now, someone who put ethics over profit. They're calling it the Sinclair effect." She shook her head. "I almost died, and Wall Street made me more valuable." "That's insane." "That's business." Ava moved closer, and Luke could smell her perfume, something subtle and expensive. "But I don't want to talk about business. I want to talk about us." Luke's heart hammered. "Us?" "Yes, us. Luke, I know the circumstances of how we met were extraordinary. I know we were thrown together by crisis and fear and survival instinct. But what I felt during those days wasn't just gratitude or trauma bonding. It was something real." She looked up at him, her eyes searching his face. "Tell me you felt it too. Tell me I'm not imagining this." Luke wanted to deflect, to protect himself the way he'd been protecting himself for years. But standing here with her, watching Eli throw bread to the ducks in the background, he couldn't lie. "I felt it," he admitted quietly. "I'm still feeling it." Relief flooded Ava's face. "Good. Because I've spent the last 2 weeks in protective custody with nothing to do but think. And I realized something. I've spent my entire adult life building a company, chasing success, proving myself to people who didn't deserve my loyalty. And in the process, I forgot to actually live. I forgot to build relationships that mattered, to let people in, to be vulnerable. You were vulnerable with me, Luke said. You didn't have much choice. Exactly. I didn't have a choice, and it was terrifying, but it was also, she struggled for the right word, freeing. For the first time in my life, I wasn't CEO Ava Sinclair. I was just Ava, fighting to survive, dependent on the kindness of a stranger who owed me nothing but helped me anyway. And that stranger turned out to be the most genuine, decent man I've ever met. Luke felt his face heat. I'm not that special. Yes, you are. You just don't see it. She reached out and took his hand, her fingers warm against his. When this is over, when the trial is done and I have my life back, I want to see where this goes. I want to get to know you properly without people hunting us. I want to spend time with you and Eli, maybe figure out what a normal relationship looks like. You sure about that? I come with a lot of baggage. A kid, PTSD, a cabin in the middle of nowhere that may or may not be safe to return to. I like your kid. We'll work through the PTSD together, and I've always liked the mountains. She squeezed his hand. I'm sure, Luke. The question is, are you? Luke looked over at Eli, who was laughing as ducks fought over the bread he was throwing. He thought about the cabin, about their quiet life before Ava had stumbled into it. That life had been safe but lonely, a holding pattern rather than actually living. Maybe it was time to take a risk. Maybe it was time to let someone in. Yeah, he said, turning back to Ava. I'm sure. She smiled, and it transformed her whole face. Good, then we'll figure it out, one step at a time. They spent the next hour walking around the park, talking about everything and nothing. Ava told him about the therapy sessions Chen had mandated, about the nightmares she still had, about her plans to transform Sinclair Dynamics into something better than it had been. Luke told her about Eli's adjustment to his new school, about Marcus visiting regularly, about the strange limbo of waiting for normal life to resume. Eli joined them after a while, walking between them and holding both their hands, chattering about the ducks and a turtle he'd seen. Luke caught Ava's eye over his son's head and saw the softness there, the genuine affection. Whatever this was between them, it was real. It was worth exploring. Too soon, Chen was signaling that their time was up. Security protocols, he explained apologetically. They couldn't stay in one place too long. Luke walked Ava back to her car, neither of them wanting to let go of the moment. At the door, she turned and looked up at him. I'll see you at the trial? She asked. I'll be there. Front row, probably. Good. She stood on her toes and kissed his cheek, her lips soft against his skin. Thank you, Luke Bennett, for everything. Then she was in the car and driving away, and Luke stood watching until the vehicle disappeared around a corner. Eli tugged on his hand. She likes you, Dad. I think she does, buddy. Are you going to marry her? Luke laughed despite himself. Way too early for that kind of talk. But maybe someday. Maybe someday. The months that followed were a strange blend of ordinary and extraordinary. Luke and Eli settled into their temporary apartment, building a routine that involved school, homework, weekend trips to the park. But underlying everything was the knowledge that it was all temporary, all waiting for the trial that would finally close this chapter of their lives. Luke and Ava texted regularly, then started having phone calls that stretched late into the night. They talked about everything, their childhoods, their dreams, their fears, their hopes for the future. Luke learned that Ava had lost her parents in a car accident when she was in college, that she'd built her company partly as a way to honor their memory. Ava learned that Luke had wanted to be a teacher before the army, that he still loved reading and had a secret talent for woodworking. The relationship developed slowly, carefully, built on a foundation of genuine respect and affection rather than the crisis that had brought them together. And gradually, Luke began to believe that maybe, just maybe, they could make this work. 3 months after the arrest, Chen called with news that the trial date had been set. 6 months from now, in federal court, the United States government versus Marcus Thompson and 13 others. It would be a media circus, he warned, national coverage, protesters, the whole 9 yards, but justice would be served. Luke marked the date on his calendar and told Eli they'd be there, that they'd see Ava again soon. The boy was excited, asking questions Luke couldn't always answer about trials and judges and what happened to bad people when they went to jail. 5 months after the arrest, Ava called with different news. Her voice was excited, almost giddy. Chen says I can leave protective custody early. The marshals will still be around for security, but I can go home, back to my actual house. And Luke, I was thinking... She paused. I was thinking maybe you and Eli could visit before the trial, just for a weekend. I have this huge house that's been sitting empty, and I'd love for you to see it, to spend some real time together without federal agents hovering over us. Luke's heart raced. You sure? That's a big step. I know, but I miss you. I miss both of you. And I think we've waited long enough, don't you? Luke thought about it for maybe 5 seconds. Yeah, we have. 2 weeks later, Luke and Eli drove to Ava's house in the hills outside Portland. It was massive, all glass and modern architecture with views that stretched for miles. Ava met them at the door wearing jeans and an old MIT sweatshirt, looking nothing like the polished CEO from the news and everything like the woman Luke had come to know. She hugged Eli first, lifting him off his feet and making him giggle, then turned to Luke. For a moment they just looked at each other, and then she was in his arms, and everything felt right in a way Luke hadn't experienced in years. They spent the weekend cooking together, watching movies, taking walks through Ava's property. Eli explored like it was Disneyland, marveling at the pool and the game room and the massive library. Luke and Ava stole quiet moments together, talking and laughing and slowly, carefully, letting their relationship deepen into something neither of them had expected but both wanted desperately. On Sunday evening, as they were preparing to leave, Ava pulled Luke aside while Eli was packing his bag. I've been thinking, she said. After the trial, after everything is settled, I want to step back from the company. Not completely, but enough to actually have a life outside of boardrooms and quarterly reports. And I was wondering, she took a breath. I was wondering if you and Eli might consider moving closer. Not necessarily in with me, not yet, but nearby. So we can see where this goes without the distance being an obstacle. Luke felt something loosen in his chest, some knot of fear and uncertainty he'd been carrying. I'd like that. Eli would too. He's been asking when we get to see you again about 100 times a day. Yeah? Yeah. Luke took her hands in his. Ava, I don't know exactly what we're doing here or where it's going to end up, but I know I want to find out. With you. She smiled, and Luke thought she'd never looked more beautiful. That's all I need to hear. The trial began on a gray morning in early October, almost exactly 8 months after Luke had found Ava dying in the woods. The federal courthouse was surrounded by news vans and protesters, some supporting Ava, others bizarrely defending the board members as victims of government overreach. Luke and Eli, flanked by security, pushed through the crowds and into the building. Inside, the courtroom was packed with journalists, spectators, and lawyers. Luke spotted Marcus in the gallery and gave him a nod. Chen was at the prosecution table with his team, looking confident and prepared. And at another table sat the defendants, 14 people in expensive suits, their faces ranging from defiant to terrified. Then Ava entered through a side door, and the room seemed to hold its breath. She wore a dark blue suit and carried herself with quiet dignity, her head high despite the cameras and stares. Her eyes found Luke's in the crowd, and she gave him a small private smile that said everything. The trial lasted 3 weeks. Luke attended every day he could, watching as prosecutors methodically built their case. They presented the emails, the financial records, the recordings. They called witnesses, Ava's former assistants, engineers who'd worked on the classified projects, the CEO of Blackstone Solutions, who'd turned state's witness in exchange for a lighter sentence. And then Ava took the stand. For 2 full days, she testified. She recounted the board meetings, the pressure to sell, the threats that became more explicit as she continued to refuse. She described the night of the accident in harrowing detail, the car chase, the crash, waking up in the woods knowing someone wanted her dead. She talked about Luke, about how he'd saved her life, about how his courage had made it possible for her to be sitting in that courtroom at all. Luke watched her, awed by her composure and strength. She never wavered, never broke down, even when defense attorneys tried to rattle her with aggressive questioning. She was magnificent. When it was Luke's turn to testify, he kept it simple and factual. He described finding Ava, the men who'd come to his cabin, the chases and close calls. He looked directly at the defendants as he spoke, wanting them to see the face of the man who'd ruined their plans. The verdict came on a Friday afternoon. The jury deliberated for less than 6 hours before finding all 14 defendants guilty on all counts. The judge, a stern woman in her 60s, showed no mercy in her sentencing. Prison terms ranging from 20 to 40 years, millions in fines, permanent bans from serving on any corporate board. Justice, finally, had been served. Outside the courthouse, Ava held a brief press conference. She thanked the prosecutors, the FBI, everyone who'd worked to bring her former board members to justice. And then, in a moment that would be replayed on news channels for days, she turned directly to the camera and said something that made Luke's throat tight. "I also want to thank Luke Bennett and his son Eli. They saved my life when they had no reason to. They protected me when they had everything to lose. They showed me that heroism isn't about grand gestures. It's about ordinary people choosing to do the right thing even when it's hard. I will never forget what they did for me, and I will spend the rest of my life trying to deserve it." Later, away from the cameras and crowds, Ava met Luke and Eli at a quiet restaurant Marcus had reserved for them. It was just the four of them, Luke, Eli, Ava, and Marcus, celebrating not just the verdict, but survival, friendship, and new beginnings. "So, what now?" Marcus asked, raising his glass. "What's next for you two?" Luke looked at Ava, who looked back with a smile that promised possibility. "Now we figure out what normal looks like," she said. Together. 6 months later, Luke and Eli moved into a house 3 miles from Ava's property. It was smaller than her place, but perfect for them. 3 bedrooms, a yard for Eli, a workshop where Luke could pursue his woodworking. Ava helped them move in, directing movers and unpacking boxes, and laughing when Eli got tangled in bubble wrap. That night, after Eli was asleep and the house was finally quiet, Luke and Ava sat on the back porch watching the stars emerge. She leaned against him, her head on his shoulder, and Luke wrapped his arm around her. "Thank you," she said quietly. "For what?" "For giving me a second chance at life, at really living." Luke pressed a kiss to her hair. "Thank you for trusting me enough to take it." They sat in comfortable silence, and Luke thought about everything that had brought them here. The cry in the woods, the desperate flight through the night, the moment in the federal courthouse when justice had finally prevailed. It had been terrifying and painful and had nearly cost them everything, but it had also given him something he'd thought he'd lost forever. Hope for a future that held more than just survival, a future built on love and trust and the courage to let someone in. Ava stirred against him. "Luke? Yeah? I love you." The words hung in the night air, simple and true. Luke felt his heart swell with emotion so intense it almost hurt. "I love you too," he said, and meant it with everything he had. Inside the house, Eli was dreaming of ducks and comic book heroes. In the city, Marcus was probably regaling friends with war stories. Somewhere, 14 people were sitting in prison cells contemplating their choices. And in this moment, on this porch, 2 people who'd been brought together by crisis and stayed together by choice were building something beautiful from the ashes of tragedy. The cry that had once pierced the darkness had led Luke to Ava. Her refusal to compromise had led her to him. And together, they'd survived what should have destroyed them. Now they were ready for whatever came next, knowing that the hardest journeys often lead to the most unexpected destinations, and that sometimes the person you save ends up saving you right back. The stars wheeled overhead, ancient and constant, bearing witness to 2 souls who'd found each other in the darkness and chosen to walk into the light together. And in the quiet of that perfect moment, with love surrounding them and hope stretching ahead, Luke Bennett finally understood what it meant to truly come home. Not to a place, but to a person. Not to safety, but to belonging. Not to the end of the story, but to a beginning that promised everything they'd been searching for without even knowing they were lost.